Hello, everyone out there in the world. Welcome to our final CSC Live of the season. We just thought we'd make a little intro here off the top to say hi to everybody who's been following these for the last few months. Christina, my partner in crime here, have been doing this since March 26th. I ended up being the first person to do it, and now here we are at the end of the run of the season, so to speak. I think this is like our 16th week or something like that. It's been an amazing run with lots of great guests, lots of great feedback from everyone out there, and questions have come in. And we thought in the beginning this was a great way to bring us together and to connect everybody during the crisis of the pandemic, and to feel that we're still connected even though we're all apart, especially in the film business that we're so heavily affected by this, and not seeing our peers and colleagues as regularly as we usually do. So we want to thank everyone for being part of it, for Cook Optics, for giving us access to the Restream account and the YouTube channel that we run through there. Everyone on the online content committee with the CSC who's been helping us with these as well. And I'm going to pass it over to Christina, because Christina's been behind the curtain here with me, running all of these, like fielding all your questions. So she's got a couple things to say, and she's been a big part of this. So, a lot of thanks are owed to her efforts.
So it's been really fun. Me and Jeremy have really bonded over making this project come to life. So it's been great just being able to work with Jeremy every day. But also we want to thank Ari and Technicolor, who have also helped out with a couple of live streams, and every single DP that's been a part of them. They've put in a lot of work too with their presentations, and they put a lot of thought into what they want to talk about and what they want to share with you. And to be able to be that generous with their knowledge that they're giving us is greatly appreciated by us, and I'm sure the community as well. The last thing we just want to say is, as you know, some of you know, we launched a new website for the CSC. So there's tons of content there. We have more history about the CSC, how to sign up. Anytime we're going to have news and events and more about our mentorship program, that'll all be updated on the CSC website. So constantly check in there. And finally, we launched also a new store. So you can get your subscription through there for the magazine, as well as a bunch of cool merch. And we're also going to be working on some more clothing over the summer. So we'll have some more clothes options coming out probably in the fall. But yeah, t-shirts, hats, hoodies, kind of stuff. So looking forward to working on that and getting that going as well. So now we're going to hand it over to Luc and Peter, who are going to take over for our final session. And I hope you guys enjoy. Bye.
Here they come. Get ready.
There we go.
Montpellier.
Thanks, guys. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for all that you've been doing. These have been really fun to watch. And as a member, it's been really great seeing us all go into the future. And as we say, the pandemic has caused us all to be remote, but at the same time, it's kind of given us these great things like this. So I really appreciate that. My name is Luc Montpellier. I've been a CSC member most of my adult life. Today we want to talk about shooting musicals, and also collaborations between cinematographers and designers, because when I think of musicals, there's no more important collaboration than with a production designer, because it's such a unique form of how to create something. For me, it was my first Rocky Horror Picture Show is the film that we're going to talk about today, the 2016 reimagining, which was a real daunting task, but also a very fun thing to try to crack, because it is such a revered piece of work that there was a lot of emotions that came with that. So like I said, I've been working in the industry for about 20 plus years now. I'm based in Toronto and in LA, and pretty much have had the fortune of working on various things all over North America and the world. And I'm very happy to introduce Peter, which I go way back with. We've probably known each other for about 30 years. And when I was asked to do musicals, like I said, I thought of Peter right away, just because our collaboration on Rocky Horror was such an important thing for us to establish, especially. So without further ado, I wanted to introduce Peter.
Hi, everyone. Good to meet everybody, and great to be invited to this. Yeah, Luc and I have worked together a few times over the years, but there was a couple of shows that were, pretty much back to back. We had worked together on Damien, and then that kind of led into Rocky Horror. So it was great to continue the renewed relationship.
Exactly. It was great for us because they're very different projects that we worked on. I mean, Damien was essentially a sequel to the Omen franchise, where you see little Damien in the movies as a young man trying to find his way in the world. So it was an interesting thing that Glenn Mazzara asked us both to join him on. And also a very revered franchise in a way, and kind of an interesting challenge and a responsibility to the fans too. So in a way, it's funny how, just thinking about it now, we both kind of worked on two things that people really hold to high accord. But it's funny how Lou Adler on Rocky Horror said something to Kenny Ortega, which was the fantastic director choreographer on the film. He said, listen, because we were all very worried. I don't know if you remember this, but it seemed like we were all very worried about, who are we to touch this amazing, iconic film? And, you know, that was a question I had, even though I was excited to try to play in that arena. But it's like, but Lou basically sat us all down, which produced the original film, and said, listen, Rocky Horror has always been supposed to be reimagined, whether it's on stage or screen or film. Like, he basically gave us the license to make this our own version. Like, I know Kenny has a very big dance background, so the film was very much more present. There was a lot more performance aspects to his imagining of this, very much like a theatrical show. Yeah. So to me, though, that was an important thing to say to us at the beginning, because for me, it was like, where do I even start? How do I even, because I do appreciate the fans of the original film. And I'm sure there's various degrees of opinion on how that was. But just to start off, I just remember it being a daunting task, which I know Lou had just kind of calmed us all down and said, you know what, this is you as artists just creating things and your version of this whole thing. So in a way, it became a new film with a lot of the content being harkening back to the original kind of, I think it was a stage show originally, a musical stage show. So to me, that once that kind of trepidation, or if that's the right word, just kind of disappeared, or that kind of anxiousness about it, it was kind of fun to start working with you and with Kenny. And I think there are unique things about shooting musicals that I had never experienced before while doing drama, because Rocky Horror was my first official musical. I had worked on a movie with Guy Madden's Saddest Music in the World, which had some slight performance elements to it, but it was pretty much a comedy. And it was the performance aspect was less of a big thing. So Rocky Horror, I'd say, was my first kind of like huge production in the musical genre. And it was interesting. I think Kenny was kind of looking for that. He was looking for somebody that hadn't done it, that could bring a sensibility from dramatic work as well, because the film does move from seamlessly, hopefully, from dramatic scenes or comedic scenes and quite over the top, but also into musical numbers. So I remember us talking a lot about how we were going to do that so that it became the same movie throughout the whole thing.
Yeah,
so for me,
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just saying, you know, I know that he wanted to harken back to, you know, like the source material that inspired Rocky Horror, like the old 30s and 40s, you know, like horror movies that were done at the time. And so he wanted that darker, more kind of B-movie horror feel to it than was in the original film.
Right, so it's almost like the cinematic history of those kind of films.
Yeah, kind of like a tip of the hat to that, and to the fan base, and all the, you know, like interaction with the performances. He wanted to acknowledge that and the history that Rocky Horror kind of spawned in our production. So those were elements that we were, you know, consciously trying to work in. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, that being said, we thought we would start just after a little intro. We'd start by showing you the trailer for Rocky Horror 2016, which will, we have some visual references that we can show you. We're obviously going to answer questions about the genre. Also, you know, beyond our working relationship, because Peter's our first production designer, I think, that the gang has had on. So there is this whole thing, this whole life that designers and DPs have, which we can get into on their own, even beyond the director, to present things to this person. So let's watch the trailer and then we can come back and start talking about different things. So I'm going to share my screen here, so bear with me. There we go. Here we go. Oh, so apparently there was no audio on that, which is odd.
No.
I could hear it. I could hear it. I thought it was fantastic.
Oh, everybody knows the songs anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Apparently, Christina has linked it. If you guys want to go watch it, just instead of you guys all watching me get into the technical stuff. It's funny, we tested all this, but it worked. So I apologize for that. Oh, it's probably because of my headphones. Should I try again? Should I try again? No, I guess not. Anyway, you guys can go watch it just gave you at least a visual idea of what it was. I think we got one of our technical glitches out of this. I think it comes in threes, so hopefully this is the only one. But yeah, just seeing the trailer, it just kind of, the whole idea of the whole camp that Rocky Horror brought to kind of the forefront and what people loved about it. Like, I just remember seeing, and you could probably tell from the trailer, but you guys can go watch it, just this whole huge performance theatrical thing, which is kind of the job that we had on this film. I mean, my background before I did this film, other than saddest music, was more dramatic work, very realistic dramas that needed to have, an entry point of realism to kind of experience the story. And this was a completely different approach, which is what appealed me to the project, was the fact that we had to put on essentially two things. We had to put on two shows. We had to make a film, but also within the context of the film, we had to put on a show, which demanded a lot of out-of-the-box thinking when it came to the people that we surrounded ourselves with. At least for my crew, I needed to basically interface with the theatrical world in ways that I hadn't before. And to me, that's always an exciting thing, to try to challenge how to work and to try new things. So, like, here's an example of working with two fabulous theatrical lighting designers, Wendy Lundgren and Davida Tatch, I think. Forgive me, Davida, for bastardizing your last name. But those two were integral in helping me create a lighting design for these theatrical shows. And on top of that, in theater, lighting designers tend to work very heavily with set designers. So I know, Peter, you had a lot of interfacing with them and me about how to, create sets, but also inject certain lighting elements within these stage shows. Because a lot of times too, scenes would break into performance in actual locations, which we can look at visual references for that. So, but I know, we both of us probably, that's fair to say, had to get into a more theatrical mindset and realism.
There was
kind of background,
it was like kind of a mashup of, because you're taking this, elements of this live performance and incorporating it into a filmed, production, so that like there was elements of both. And that's why I think it was good, actually, that we did the stuff at the Elgin, because you're actually in that space, and we had the benefits of like that like a space designed for those types of performances offered. And it was I think that was a really good way to, like that was at the beginning of our schedule, and that was a good way to kind of introduce us into that whole aspect that like it is a melding of the two the two forms.
Exactly. Yeah, we shot at the Elgin, and then the castle in the film was shot at Casa Loma. That had its own unique challenges we can get into, just also for access and all that. Yeah, it was true, because it did kind of set us in a tone of starting with a lot of these theatrical performances, kind of gave you a sense of the film you were making, because the costuming in the film and the color, everything was all brought together in a theatrical form. So when you went into these dramatic scenes, you still kind of kept a little bit, that kind of performance elements kind of stayed with you while you were figuring out lens choices and camera angles. And again, as you say, these old movies that we watched, I remember downloading all these old sci-fi films and just kind of getting into the sense of how that would influence the photography, which a lot of canted angles and wide angles and very in your face kind of stuff, which was quite liberating to be able to do that and a lot of fun. And especially, like I said, the performances are so big that you're kind of go along for this ride. And, also I remember just some of the set pieces that you made, had to be very much like these old movies, had to kind of be lit from within. So we had a lot of collaboration on technologically, what would we put in there? Of course, LED played a huge part in this whole thing. But just the idea of where things would be lit from, because as we see, maybe this is a good time to get into the PDF doc.
Sure.
Just so we can kind of start talking and looking at sets, and I'm sure that's going to inspire a lot of things based on what we're talking about. So let me get that going. Here we go. So maybe, Peter, do you want to talk about this document that the art department created?
Yeah, so this is, like the lookbook that we put together basically to present how we were going to, handle the material in the film, how we were going to, what we were going to do at each of the locations for each of the numbers. So what we did was this was done in prep, probably prior to the tech survey, so that we knew at each location or stage set what we were going to be doing, modifying, building, how they were going to be dressed. So that's a combination of some source material, some pre-viz that we did, some collages of different images, and then what Luc did was he paired up the corresponding scene that we shot there with an actual image from the film. So this first one, for instance, is Casa Loma. And in the conceit of the film was that Casa Loma was an old movie theater. And this is where the usherette that's in the still from the show does the first number in the show. And she's an usherette that's obsessed with horror and sci-fi films. So what we had to do was turn Casa Loma into a movie theater. So we had to add the marquee, the box office, put show posters in the windows, add a little bit of light with the stained glass window. So you see the previs on one side, and then how Luc lit it and shot it on the day. So I think that it's useful to kind of compare, what we imagined and what we actually ended up with.
Exactly. And then the previs, before, after the previs and these concept drawings were done, I remember sitting with you, Peter, and actually going through, some of the practical aspects of where light sources were going to be, things, and if you notice on the still on the right, that it was important that that marquee be the main source of light. So me understanding and having an input on the exact quality of light coming out of that. I remember having it's amazing how extensive conversations you have about just a light bulb. And it sounds so obvious. And the quality of it too would just kind of because also this idea of an old movie theater puts you and sets you up in a certain kind of period light fixture. And to me, that's a very important thing to be able to get right. Because I think if, as campy and as kind of expressive as this whole thing is, I think you got to commit to the language that we're going to. And even with kind of a farcical film like this in a very fun way, you got to commit to what we set out to do, or it's going to feel false. If I suddenly use modern style choices in this exterior, let's say, it probably wouldn't feel right. So I just remember getting in the sense, and you'll find as we move through these pictures, you'll see there is a period aspect to this whole thing. I was just amazed how close the concept drawings were to a lot of the stills that we ended up shooting. Like this idea of what Peter did on the left and what we ended up. So I was very greatly inspired by these images. So here's a few more. There's an interior. There's the interior at the Elgin.
Yes, exactly. So we made that switch. As soon as you walk through the doors, you end up in the lobby of the Elgin. And this, the presentation that we did with this wasn't quite as evolved as the earlier one, but it shows, turning that space into a movie lobby by adding a, candy counter and the usherette stand and all that sort of stuff.
Exactly. Do you want to, I know Raymond had a question there, Peter.
Yeah.
Raymond was asking who all is typically involved in the lookbook of this caliber of project.
Sorry, I thought I did.
Can you talk about it for the rest of the folks?
So we had a very talented guy named Lucas Waring in the art department that did this. I know that he's since gone on to, Star Trek and things like that. But it's, it is a very specialized skill. Not everybody in the art department has it. It's basically, you're mostly in Photoshop, combining, photos and painting on top of them, and taking working drawings from a set designer and rendering them more photographically. And it's a tool that's being used more and more because it does offer a very high quality image for producers and directors to be able to understand what you're going to do. Because I mean, that's I think one of the challenges with what we do. You're describing things visually to people that maybe are more script oriented. They come from a writing background, so sometimes there's a little disconnect. I guess if you're not a visual thinker, it's hard to say, stand in front of the parking lot at Castellum and say, we're going to do this, that, and the other thing, and they get a clear picture. Whereas, with a good quality previs illustration like that, it becomes very clear. And, I think, in that case, I think we're pretty close to the mark.
Right. It's the software that you use a lot that I've seen in our department is SketchUp. A lot. Well,
SketchUp to do the drawings, because that's a very quick and easy way to build something three-dimensionally that then you could maneuver a camera through and get a sense of the space and the angles and the sight lines and that sort of thing. But for there are other three-dimensional software things for modeling, but for these kinds of two-dimensional presentations that we did like that, it was a lot of Photoshop and then painting on top of photos in Photoshop. And I think Lucas would have 60 layers, like this insane amount of layers just to create that kind of image. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's probably one of the most important documents or process at early stages of production. Like, I should mention this. I always ask for my office to be right next to the art department, or even sometimes I always sometimes even have a desk in the art department, because especially on a project like this, to me, it's like, it's like an actor getting into the mode. Like, for me, sitting there with all the imagery that Lucas had designed and all the kind of things that you also reject, it's also sometimes good to know what we don't like. But to just be able to sit in a room with images all over the walls and just kind of dream about it, that to me was a key thing to get into this project. And again, for me, being able to walk, you know, a couple of feet and go into your office, Peter, and start talking and jamming about stuff was a fair thing. Because I think a lot of times, you know, people think maybe the director is there for every single step of the way, and they are. They basically, I find the best directors that I've worked with set the tone at the beginning for all of us. He gets all the keys together, especially us two, because there's also hair, makeup, wardrobe, you know, set design, all of these key people, and kind of gives us this. I remember Kenny talking to us generally about what he wanted this film to feel, and sometimes got very specific. But also I knew that he was designing a lot of these dance pieces, because the film is broken up into a lot of dance sections. That's why you'll see on some of the document we'll get back to that there's these numbers that we had to do. But I find the best directors will let Peter and I, let's say as designer DP, go off into our own corners and dream a bit about how to make this and enhance it a lot better. And that to me is kind of a great thing, to be able to kind of get to know a director enough to understand that they want you to push things. And I really did feel that Kenny wanted that. So by doing so, it's inevitable that Peter and I are going to be in a room alone without even the director, jamming about and dreaming about stuff. And we start inspiring each other that way. And whether, to me, having a visual reference from a concept drawing stage is the first step that we can start playing around with. Hey, what if we did this? Hey, what about if we add this element to this set? You know what this could do? This could inspire a whole new part of the dance number that could, you know, have a motorcycle riding around on a set, which actually
that's a good point, because you know, like just when you were talking about that, I was thinking, you know, like when we were designing the lab, where, you know, like a lot of the big numbers happen and the motorcycle goes up the ramp and around the balcony and then back down. Like there was like a big dance number there up on that balcony. Here, right by the railing. And you were saying how, you know, like it would be great, you know, because you're looking up right, you know, like up at the ceiling there, and it'd be great to have you know, like some sort of light source there. And, you know, like we're saying, well, the railing kind of goes all around it, and we yeah, so that shows the ramp and the balcony behind it. So, you know, like because of our discussion about, you know, what's going to happen up there, and even though we do see some theatrical lights, you know, like that was getting to you know, like a spot where it'd be kind of very kind of distracting to have, you know, like looking up at more light. So we put an LED strip in the hand railing, and it went all the way around it, so that whenever the dancers were up there, they were lit by something that we incorporated into the set. And even other elements in the stage, like you were saying earlier, you know, like having some of these kind of bizarre fantasy art deco inspired set pieces that had a lot of illuminated elements in them, you know, like just to give a little bit of glow in this otherwise, you know, like dark castle-like interior, you know, like, and that even, you know, like affected some of the choice of materials. Like there was that kind of
reflectivity of things.
Yeah. You know, like, cause
yeah,
that's one thing, you know, cause that's actually another discussion that we had, you know, like we got this dark space, but we got to make, you know, like it light interactive. So it wasn't just, you know, like the things that were built in, but, you know, we did that, that quality where it looked like there was like moisture and like running down the walls by putting a lot of glaze layers on it. So it looked like the walls were, you know, like sweating almost. And the other fabric that, or material that we used and we selected for its, you know, like reflective or translucent or luminous qualities.
Exactly.
You know,
and that, I remember being part of that discussion. Like,
yeah,
you would bring these tiles for the floor or a treatment to me and say, hey, do you think this is fine? We did extensive camera testing, because also, not only did you have to deal with performance in these spaces, there were dramatic scenes that were happening as well. So you had to kind of, again, that blending of theatricality for some of the performance. Like an example is this: you built a stage, but then also there's the whole, you know, Rocky awakening, that kind of thing. So it's
a ice coffin there. Yeah,
exactly. And just a note on this still on the right, that you probably see the grid of the set up top. that essentially was replaced digitally to have a huge dome. These are actually all stills from the dailies, from the DIT cart. So this, obviously none of the effects work was done. But I mean, as you can imagine, just looking at an image like that, the coordination of all our departments really needed to happen. And the only way to do is to spend time together. And again, I wanted to bring up this still here. If you look on the left, that's essentially a SketchUp drawing just on the right there, where once you take it from concept drawing and a two-dimensional, more of a texture color zone, inspiration document, the sets get rendered in 3D so that, you know, I'm sure if you can speak to this, Peter, how that integrates into your process. But for me, for a moment, it really, really, especially Kenny, once we had this 3D model of the set, it started to inform a lot of the choreography that was happening as we were prepping, which we'll talk about. But for me also, you can use this to visualize lighting design, where you can actually dial in the virtual camera of SketchUp to find camera angles, and you can literally wander through these sets. I actually had an app on my iPad that can actually open up SketchUp files so that anytime I wanted to, I could call it up on my iPad. And especially on the new iPads now, the processing is so smooth now that I can actually visualize where shots would be. And I remember it was kind of a symbiotic relationship where, as choreography, I'm being asked what the app is. I'll actually find it. I think it's actually a SketchUp. I think it's called SketchUp for the iPad, but don't quote me yet. I'll probably find it when we move forward. But to me, that was a thing. And I don't know, Peter, how that 3D model stage, what do you use that for other than previs? Do you actually use it for construction or?
No, usually for construction, you do an AutoCAD, you know, like working drawings where, you know, you've got some 3D capability, but it's limited, you know, like I mean, the thing with the SketchUp is that it's really good to see, you know, for instance, we use it to see, you know, like as, you know, like if we have the railing there, is it going to be a problem when, you know, like, is it going to, you know, like block somebody's head, or is this column too thick? You know, like, do we see the dancers enough when they're doing their number there? Because I think actually we did do something like that. You know, like we realized that some of that stuff was blocking too much, even though it would be, you know, like more realistic for the type of material. So we said, okay, well maybe then they, you know, built the arches out of metal, so we reduced them probably by 2/3 or something, so that it opened it up. And so it's helpful for things like that, you know, just to get a sense of the space 3-dimensionally, and, you know, like it allows you to easily move through there, so you can make some decisions that, you know, like initially on paper made sense, but then when you see it's, you know, 3-dimensionally before it's actually built, you could, you know, like notice things you didn't perceive before, and change them, you know, before it gets built.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. I mean, I just should mention, and you mentioned that you altered things based on these models, based on choreography. And, you know, besides me also being able to use it to visualize lighting and where to put these LED strips and how to have this set lit, even though it's theatrical, but have the character of the set shine through how it's lit from within. That was an important thing for me. Also, I just should mention that prep on this with Kenny was a very unique, because essentially all of his prep, which was about a month of choreography set aside with the dancers, was in the studio figuring out some of these dance numbers. So as Peter was designing the sets and I was involved in figuring it out, I was going to choreography sessions every day with my DSLR, videotaping and finding angles with Kenny, which is a very unusual way to work, because usually you're in an office and you sit. But to me, things were happening at the same time. So if I had ideas that Kenny wanted to bring to camera in the final, I was able to also come to the art department and say, okay, we want to do this shot, but these are problems, or could we add this little element to it so that the actors, so it's like the design was happening as the choreography was happening.
Yeah.
Which is kind of an unusual thing because, you know, I remember us having to be on our toes a lot. Oh, you want to send a set of actor or dancers up on the rafters? Well, we got to make sure my team and I, you know, my gaffer George Kerr, which was on the cinematic side, and then working with lighting designers in unison to make sure there was light there, but also the right kind of light. So that was an interesting thing. But yeah, I just thought I'd mention prep. I think I remember you telling me you had to go find Kenny all the time.
Yeah.
At the studio.
Really yeah. I mean, you know, Kenny's background is as a choreographer, and it's in a, you know, like long tradition of choreographers turned dancers, from like Stanley Donen and Gene Kelly to Bob Fosse. So he's, you know, like the dance was kind of paramount for him. So like Luc said, the entire prep time, he was at the rehearsal studio with the choreographers and the performers working out all the numbers. So, you know, we had to know what, you know, like how much space they required for their dance, you know, like keep that in mind when we're, you know, like building the stage or, you know, like prepping a location. But then they had to know, like, if, you know, for instance, we had limitations, you know, like if, you know, like they had to be aware of our limitations. There was also things where, you know, like the dancers were on railings, or like even at the Elgin on the candy bar. So we had to make sure that we had, you know, like bulletproof glass, because we had a dancer dancing up there. And so there was a lot of back and forth with, you know, like what they were doing in the choreography and what demands that was making of our set pieces that we had to incorporate. And then, you know, like you were there, you know, seeing how, you know, like what camera positions you would want to use. So that kind of informed what we were doing as well. So that, you know, like we knew, you know, like if you needed something like a lighting source, or if, you know, like that, you know, like portal need to be kept clear because you're gonna, you know, like have the camera there or some lights here or whatever, you know, like, so that was part of the discussion that, you know, like we were saying earlier, combined the live performance that was getting filmed.
Exactly. By the way, I just thought I'd mention, I found the app that I was talking about. It's actually called SketchUp for the iPad, which allows you to open apps, files that are created on a computer. So just to kind of finalize that. Also, just the color, the idea of integrating our color scheme for sets and lighting, but also with wardrobe. I mean, as you can see, the wardrobe in the film is a very expressive thing.
The costume designer, he's a Tony Award winning Broadway costume designer who did a fabulous job on these.
Exactly. And maybe I'll just talk about a technical thing that I remember us having a bit of an issue with. I basically use lookup tables a lot, like a lot of cinematographers do, just on their shoots, essentially create a palette to start from. I have a LUT that I worked with Technicolor, Mark Cooper and the team at Technicolor in Toronto, when we were still shooting film. Yes, I am that old. In transitioning into doing digital intermediates where you would scan the film and put it in a theater and you would do all your color decisions there. I've been using that same projection LUT that they created way back when I did Away From Her. I still use it to this day because I just love all the work and all the kind of subtleties of color reproduction. It's essentially a way to bring digital cameras, take linear color spaces that a lot of these cameras have and converts it into film color. And I remember we were having an issue, and I kind of understood the film we were making as far as color goes, and also philosophy of what Kenny wanted, when essentially when you're rendering an image in live, but that this LUT is translating these colors, it's skewing colors, it's interpreting color because it's making as if the color is being rendered on film. But there was such an attention to detail for costuming and color in the whole live show element that Kenny was looking at the monitor and going, because the reason I love the LUT too is because the skin tones render in a very interesting way for me. It's the most cinematic or filmic skin tone rendering that I had seen. So that's why I keep going back to it. And then you tweak it depending on the show. is that the colors weren't rendering like they were in reality. And that was kind of bumping on Kenny because, and understandably, all this work that you had done, I had done, everyone, but it was important for me to bring that early on in the process. And I remember shooting camera tests to try to explain, but you could only bring it so far. So there was a lot of effort in post to swing these colors back to where it was based on how we saw them. And I know Mark Cooper was just a genius at doing this, where he would grab certain colors within a frame with secondaries and swing it back. And we almost ended up creating a new LUT in post just to bring back some of that element. So to me, that was an interesting thing. The idea of what a live audience would be seeing was a very important thing to Kenny. So early on in the process, we figured this out. So it was interesting how even the choreography would inform the sets and the sets would inform the choreography. Even the technical aspect of this was being tweaked as we went. We shot this on an Arri Alexa, with a panavized Arri Alexa with lenses, Primo Prime kit, and some zooms, because I figured the zooms would be a huge part of the performance aspect, without diverting here, but also the idea of, Dave Sheridan was one of our operators, and Ono Wida was another one of our operators that were phenomenal in getting in this mindset of performance. I used to kind of joke that they were NFL cinematographers, where they had to kind of follow a football across the field, because without proper framing, it would be, we would not capture these kind of amazing things that these dancers and Kenny had kind of put together. So not to divert into this, but I just remembered all of those things technically being very important. And even I remember Dave and Ono going to rehearsals, and that how important that would be to inject themselves into. And I just remember on set, even them having conversations with certain dancers that saying, okay, this piece, I know you guys have changed this. Are you going to go up in this quadrant so that I can make sure that I kind of follow you? I thought that was an interesting thing to mention, just beyond, the color and all that. There were some technical things that were very important to kind of get down. So maybe I'll bring up the documents again, and we can keep talking. So yeah, this is more of a theatrical scene that Wendy was integral in. Was it Wendy? I'm not sure.
Yeah, Wendy was at the album. Yeah.
Yeah, because I had, the show was so big that I had two lighting designers that had to kind of take care of certain performances, because it took so much time to really get right, which was a big learning curve for me as far as being able to collaborate with those positions.
Yeah, there were a lot of light changes throughout the number, and there was all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
Oh, it was literally putting two shows. It's like shooting two movies simultaneously. But just the idea of look at, as far as the sets and how the light all has to work with the wardrobe, all of that to me is such a fun thing to try to figure out.
And this is like some of the other things that happened on that stage, basically, and this is where the lighting was instrumental, because, like it's the same set, but it's a completely different image because of the lighting and the smoke on the ground, this was Frankie coming down in King Kong's hand.
Exactly. And that's kind of also talking, this is a good image to talk about what you've been mentioning, is this whole idea of the old movie and, the kind of classic Hollywood nod to cinema, which to me, the original film didn't have, which was kind of why I almost see this as a new movie in a lot of ways. And again, if you notice on the left, all of these sections were all based on the number.
Yeah.
And there's the old sci-fi lit up guitar that, again, took us many, many weeks to get just right. There's actually LEDs in that guitar that are wireless DMX connected.
And so that too, as he was, mimicking playing, it would strobe through different colors. And it was really quite an elaborate build. Yeah.
Exactly. Sorry, I guess I put an image upside down there on the left, just to keep everyone on their toes. It's all intentional. And here we go. This is the whole Busby Berkeley sequence that was a lot of fun to do. And again, this was at a mansion, I believe.
Yes.
And again, look at the color was referencing the Busby Berkeley movies, where they were all these amazingly Technicolor level images. So what I needed to give Kenny what he was looking for, besides just cranking up contrast and chroma, was to actually have the colors within the frame. You know, the idea of, you know, what the skin tone and what the set, and also the water was a big portion. I think Mark had actually grabbed that kind of teal or watercolor and swung it to a more untraditional Technicolor kind of scenario. So to me, just without having those the color palette within the frame, you wouldn't be able to achieve this. You know, there's post will not fix everything. Then some underwater stuff. That's pretty much the end of the document. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about, Peter? Actually, I think we skipped a few sets.
Did we?
Oh, here's
yeah,
a good example. Yeah.
The tunnels and things. Yes, there you go. Yeah,
Okay.
that must have been fun shooting there in that long tunnel with like 2 access points, one at either end or something.
That is correct.
Yeah.
But here's an example of also shifting gears within, and this is where I need to work closely with Peter on, because again, there's this whole journey that happens underneath the castle, which was at Casa Loma again, where it's a bit less theatrical, a little bit more scary, but it still needs to be theatrical. But this is probably the most extreme of kind of dark realism that we went into. So, you know, the idea of putting practicals in the right place is a very important thing, especially as you say, because of the access points.
Yeah, that's right. We had lights throughout. I think even that candelabra, you know, like was, you know, like, I don't know, like a triple wick candles or something like that. And
that's right. And that's
because there was like, there was no place to hide lights there, right? I mean, it was.
That's right. And this is when the modern technology really kind of helps with these cameras that are very sensitive to light, where you have lenses. I know the Primo primes were a 1.9, which, you know, is not as wide open as some lenses can be, but it was just enough to be able to get us where we needed to go. And because it's a lot easier in all these more theatrical sets, or when you have room to create light sources. Let's see. I have a question here, just about talking about challenges of movement and choreography, and both shooting and building sets around this whole thing.
Well, everything's got to be pretty much 360, right? Because they were all over the place. So everything had to be built with that in mind. And that's why a lot of the, you know, like integrating lighting elements into the set design and into the pieces that we brought in to, you know, like help motivate some of the other lights that would be used to light those numbers was really important.
Exactly.
Because yeah, they were,
well,
and then like you said, like some of the crazy camera angles, so you were looking everywhere. Yeah,
that is true. The whole 360 element is something that I forgot about. That's right, that you could literally, we had to light everything for 360 as far as the set was concerned. And this notion that theatrical lighting had to also double and help me on the set to light dramatic scenes. It wasn't just set lighting, it was actually that set lighting and what choices that George and I and Wendy as well in conjunction had to work together on how do you be able to use some more of these theatrical lights that I believe RPG actually supplied, a rock and roll staging company that has a lot of amazing lighting there, and automated lighting. That how do we integrate? I remember there was one detail in the laboratory set for when the motorcycle crashes through the window, we wanted to hit the set with some lightning, but also have a source that was able in the ceiling to not have to change the fixtures, a source that we can also manipulate to just create a bit of moonlight through the windows when we were doing other scenes. So to me, it was that fixture choice. We spent a lot of time trying to figure out, I think it was the Mac 250 it was called. It's just basically an automated light that we ended up putting back there that we can manipulate and create lightning, but also have more of an ambient source. So to me, but that light fixture wasn't just a tungsten source. It was something that needed to be DMX'd and put into a board and be able to manipulate. And it's interesting, I know that that kind of lighting on sets now, even for dramatic work, has become a little bit more in vogue because it's automated. You don't have to send a technician up to the grid to try to manipulate it. So a lot of automated light, and especially now with LED technology becoming lighter. So to me, that was an integral part. And I know LEDs were starting, I think they were around, but the newer fixtures weren't there enough. So we still had a lot of the rock and roll stuff to actually draw from.
But that programmable aspect of the LED was really important too, because in some of those stills in the lab, you know, like the steps that go up to where the cooler that holds Rocky are kind of, you know, kind of purple, like old, you know, like subway steps in New York, that sort of thing. But then when Rocky goes up and is hit by the lightning, you know, like we changed those steps to the colors of the pride flag, and we had those elements even in the scissor lift that the cooler was on when it got elevated to be hit by the lightning. And so, you know, that programmable aspect of the LED lights in those things was really important to cue different, you know, like different moments in the numbers. Yeah,
that's worth mentioning because it's true. The idea that lights weren't just always constant. Yeah. Even with the dramatic scenes, as you say, they were, man, it's like, I remember having Davida or Wendy with us. We're constantly interfacing for that kind of stuff. Because also you sometimes get inspired on the day. It's not all planned. And having that experienced board operator with you and lighting designer was able to be inspired on the day. But you're right, things were constantly moving organically that way. There's a question here from Raymond that might be part of this whole thing, is asking, speaking on the complexity of the choreography and the production design team, sets, and the cinematography, did you guys find you had to make a lot of adjustments on the shoot day? Or did you feel prepared to handle those changes before in the previs and lookbook?
Well, you know, the thing, one of the challenges, you know, like for us with the sets was that, you know, like at a certain point, they stopped rehearsing at the rehearsal stage and would rehearse on the actual set, so that there weren't a lot of surprises on the day. I think that, you know, like there's always, you know, like things that come up organically, like Luc was saying, but, you know, like anything major, like we basically had them rehearsing on unfinished sets. Like they would come in at night, you know, we would have to clean up at the end of the day. The painters would, you know, have to, you know, pull up their drop cloths and do a good sweeping up and stuff, because then they were going to be sliding all over the floors and stages and stuff. But I mean, all that stuff, because of the complexity of it, the safety of it too, because, you know, with things like motorcycles crashing through windows and all that, a lot of that stuff we had to rehearse beforehand on the actual set and minimize the surprises, you know, like, so that, you know, like hopefully the surprises were only good surprises. Because I think we got that motorcycle thing in the first take, didn't we?
We did, but there was a lot of structural planning you had to make.
Oh yeah, there was a lot,
which I remember, and also having
like the ramp that was on the other side that we couldn't see, and, you know, like had to be high enough for the guy to, you know, get enough lift to come and, you know, like not be too high so that he didn't overshoot his mark. And yeah, there's a lot of technical stuff there. Yeah.
No, I agreed. I think there had to be a blending to add on a cinematography side. This is the mindset I had. You had to have a certain level of prep, as you say, Peter, for safety and for choreography and all that. But one thing that I loved about this is you still had to have this free spirit of being able to throw out a lot of things on the day, because dancers, I've learned, and a lot of creative people are like this, they love to experiment. And sometimes things would happen on the set, even though they had been rehearsing for a month. A lot of things were happening where they'd be fooling around and trying different tricks, and Kenny would see it and go, that's amazing. Because that's his mind. He wanted to go, we have to film this. So as a cinematographer, even though we have everything planned, you had to have this other side that says, okay, I can deal with this, because you don't want to not capitalize on this amazing thing. Same thing with an actor, you know, if they come up with a performance choice that you hadn't planned and suddenly you want to, it forces you to turn around in a way where you wouldn't have planned to do it. You can either decide that that's too difficult or capitalize on the creativity. And what's beautiful is that was happening, even though it was planned to the T and that we had a good base, there was still this playfulness around trying things. And that means me and my team and I, you know, my key grip, Trevor Moore's, had to be ready with a crane at the ready's notice to kind of move it in places we hadn't decided, because there was a new thing that was happening that they were going to run up somewhere. So, you know, moving the camera needed to be free, even though we had decided, I don't think we want to do handheld. It has to be more in that classic Dutchy 50s kind of sci-fi horror movie kind of idea. And we tried to keep, even with lens choices, keep them a little bit wider and closer to see a lot more of the environment, you know, integrating with the actors. So there was this playfulness that I think was really, you know, I was really happy that that was still happening.
Oh yeah, Kenny definitely kept you on your toes, you know, like
very much,
come up with ideas at the last minute, and you know, so like you have to respond, and yeah.
It's that free spirit idea. It's this free spirit idea, I think, as, you know, I'll speak as a DP, you know, I love going on to projects that will challenge myself. I mean, I don't ever want to, not that I get bored, but to me, I'm at my best sometimes when I'm experiencing something new. And, you know, that's why on Saddest Music, I bring that up. A lot of people ask me about that film, and I bring that up as one of those moments where you had to throw everything you knew out the window and just kind of go with what Guy as an artist was trying to do. And it was almost like method DPing. I think a lot of that spirit came to this, that you have all this technical knowledge and ways to do things, but there had to be a point where, as you say, for safety and for, you know, putting on a show, you have to be organized with cues and everything. But it was great that I was able to turn to Wendy or Davida, my lighting designers, and say, hey man, why don't we do this as well? Could we change this at one point? Because, you know, they had everything sunk to time code with the music. So when we were doing these performances, everything, so that we can repeat camera angles based on a certain time. If we wanted to start at the middle of a song, everything was like computerized to the T. But then what was beautiful is I could still change something in the middle of that. And because I had the right talent around me, they were able to type on their stuff and literally change cues or change colors on the day. So it was a great blending of those two things, which kind of everyone had that spirit, whether it was a dancer or a producer or Lou or Kenny, you know, he really kind of encouraged that pushing of things. And that kind of affected how we work together.
Yeah.
What's that? Sorry.
It was great having Luc there too, because you know, like he would often push us to not do what they had done before, you know, like to do something different, to try something new, you know, like because he you know, like he's been there from practically from the beginning, you know, like when it was still a stage performance. Yeah.
Right. And listen, sometimes you got to be willing to fall on your face. That's the thing. when you venture out of what's safe, you have to also accept that it might not always work out, you know, but luckily on this, and that's what happened. Like, we used to praise mistakes on Saddest Music in the World, because it was like, it was made to be like a 30s film that was found in an old vault. So out of focus scratches, we used to kind of cheer when we got a scratch on the neck, just because it was part of the whole thing. This was a studio film with Fox, and I got to hand it to them. I mean, they really ventured into unknown territories. You know, I think Fox 21, the head of Fox 21 came to set one day. He was just had a smile on his face all day. But that takes a lot of faith to, you know, stage things like, and it was a very ambitious project for what, you know, the budget was.
Yeah, and the amount of time too,
Yeah, exactly. So it was kind of gratifying that the whole project was approached not from fear, but from actually encouragement. And when you have a studio like Fox 21 on it that really says go for it, there felt like there was a lot of support all the time. Because again, we were doing things, even though it's a musical, musicals could be anything they want. I mean, also the budgets can just expand, and kudos to you, not to right back at you, but I mean, you had these monster sets to design, and there's this whole intricacy of what designers have to balance as far as materials, safety, you know, these floors cost 10 times more than this floor, but it'll look better. And this real kind of, and I can say this because I've spent a lot of time with Peter and other designers, this whole kind of like picking where the money's going to go. Yeah. And it's the same thing with the lighting department. I mean, there is a box always. And for me, what I try to do is get people involved that are the creatives and the producers, involve everyone to get excited about it, so that if there are kind of ideas that are a bit out of the box, at least they can all be informed as to what they're going to get. So I think as much as new things, there is ultimately this faith in you and I to kind of be able to execute these things. And, but I'm in awe of designers that are able to do that, that just can, and strong art directors, I understand, tend to also take your ideas and implement them and budget them. I think that's accurate. Usually that person takes your crazy ideas and makes them happen.
They're more involved in like the execution and follow through and that sort of thing.
Right. What else? I think we've seen the entire document. I don't know if there's any other questions. No, I don't think so right now.
So what else were you talking about?
Yes, there is somebody reminding me about it. How were my operators involved in rehearsals? That's a good question. They were very involved in the rehearsals as much as we could. It was an interesting thing. I'll just talk about this for a bit. It was an interesting thing to understand when is the right time to bring them in, because there was a huge portion of research and development, I would say, of creating the choreography. It's not like Kenny had it all figured out before he came in. So basically, he just decided, I want to have a month with my dancers in a studio, and I want to figure this whole thing out. So I'd say probably around 2/3 into the month, that's when our operators came in, just because we also had to have enough numbers worked out to be able to inject that point of view. And a lot of the times, you know, Dave and Ono had a lot of great ideas as well. But in a way, it's almost like controlling the voices coming in at a certain time. I was there, but not all the time, because I was also working with you and dealing with production elements that beyond just this. I would always end up every day in the studio for a way. Even then, I had to kind of find the right moments. And I was always welcomed by Kenny to walk around with my camera. And sometimes he would stop the choreography and say, hey, I have this idea. And I would literally capture his idea on my DSLR and catalog it so that he would remember what it was. So as far as the operators went, they would come in probably after all of the numbers were completely kind of fine-tuned, so that they could come in and kind of see and find out. Essentially, it's like them being able, like a bobsledder, I would say, memorize where things were going to be. So yeah, and Arthur's also asking, was there a different schedule for this production? Were there rehearsal days worked into the shooting schedule? I'm trying to remember. I think everything was pretty dialed in. I don't think. I don't know. Do you remember how many days we had for this?
No, I can't remember that. I think I don't. It was not quite enough. I remember that.
It's always the case.
Yeah. Like there were, yes, because we had a second AD just for the rehearsal shoots, for the rehearsals.
That's right.
And they were doing some rehearsing even while we were shooting on weekends, I think.
That's right. Because I think it's like an athlete, they had to keep going, but it didn't seem, and I know there were locations like Casa Loma where we had to come and go. because there were, or I remember that we had to split our I think the studio days were kind of in the middle, weren't they? Just because we had to prep, you had to prep sets on either end.
Yes, and I think I think yes, you're right. I think we shot the pool stuff after the lab stuff on the stage.
That's right. It's
There's
like
a
4 years
question
ago.
here about the color scheme. If that was influenced by the numbers. And yeah, it was, like I said earlier, with Rocky being born, like Kenny had some definite ideas about like what he wanted to play up. There was definitely a very specific color scheme for the lobby, for like the introduction to into the film, because as you could see from that one image that went by, like there was, the idea was that this movie theater has now,
which one? Do you want me to bring up a specific image?
Yeah, I think there's a later one that showed the castle in ruins. Yeah, this one here.
There you go.
Because when Brad and Janet show up, it's been the movie theater's been long abandoned, and the Transylvanians have been like living there. So but at the beginning of the film, when the usherette is going in there, we wanted to play up that old glamour, and so there was a lot of like the reds and the golds were very specific to that and that look and that number. So yeah, there was always a consideration of like the numbers that were going to be performed there. That's why like as Luc mentioned earlier, on those panels, you've got what the interior or exterior location is, but more importantly, it's the number that's happening there. And that was how, like those were kind of like the benchmarks throughout the show that informed those decisions. Like this, we need, like on this set, this is happening. And what this was usually the most elaborate and complex element was, like the dance and musical numbers. So that was the focus of what we had to address and what we had to achieve in those places. So again, this is where we, at the end of the film, the gold comes back in the costumes of the performers here, because this is when they were all blasted off.
Well, just this example here between Rose Tint My World, and Don't Dream It, there's a major tone shift within these two numbers. This is more upbeat, kind of like Tina. I know Tina Turner was a very big influence for Laverne Cox, which plays Frankenfurter, like just based on the costuming and everything. It was a very big influence. So, and it's got kind of that old Tina Turner song beat.
That high energy,
high energy, and everyone's on stage, and which I think even informed the lighting design based on, just the songs were a big influence. I remember having some of the music in my car going, even during prep, I would put it in my car every night just to kind of get into the zone. And then you have Don't Dream It, which is a much more slower tempo thing. So even the set pieces would shift. And again, I think we were all inspired by that tone shift that way. And then it picks up again. And I'm sorry, this image again is upside down, but part of Don't Dream It, all the lights go down and we have the start field on a projection screen, and Laverne is on a crane being carried across, and to me, we slow everything down. So, I mean, it was really a lot of fun. It's almost like a giant music video in a way, at least. That's how I felt when it came to being inspired. And I have, fortunately, I have these fond memories of having started in that business in the 90s, where it was all about experimentation. And it's funny how I brought all of that, or I was able and allowed to bring all of that to this project.
That crane was an interesting thing too, because we had, this is how she's kind of, it's used to kind of like arm over the audience, and we had Laverne was actually scared of heights, and like initially like Kenny wanted her to walk kind of like seamlessly off the crane onto the stage and into a dance number, so we had to like come up with a discrete railing that would have would be easy to then kind of like unlock and get her out of there like on camera and do it, so that you wouldn't even notice, because she was very concerned about being, like 20, 30 feet up in the air. But even like the whole thing of getting that crane, because he wanted something that looked like an old Hollywood crane. And there was, quite a lot of effort and consideration, and quite a few meetings went into that one dance number. Yeah.
And I just remember Kenny basically also has directed a lot of live stage shows. So he has a very sensibility, I mean, I know he told me that, basically he was basically supposed to go on the road on Michael Jackson's last tour. And unfortunately he passed away. So he wasn't able to do that tour with him. And I remember him telling me on Rocky Horror that he wanted to bring a lot of concepts that he had come up with that tour onto this film, because he was kind of saddened that he wasn't able to work with Michael on this stuff. Yeah. And so he still wanted to kind of, show a tribute to him by somehow bringing some of these ideas that Kenny had to the film. And I remember him saying, we're really going to try to do this. And to me, that was a special thing, because I was like, all of his ideas had a history to them in a lot of ways. And
one little thing that we did, to that point was, we had in the lab, there's these walls that opened up, and then there was Rocky's gym in there, and we had a stained glass window, and we had like the gloved, like God hand and the kind of limp-wristed Adam's hand there, and the God hand had a glove on, because Laverne wore a glove in that costume. So I remember, talking to William about what that glove would look like, because we were then going to incorporate it into the stained glass window. And so, yeah, that was one of those little kind of nods to that, like the glove.
Exactly.
Hand.
Yeah, exactly. And the crane, just the idea of having Frankenfurter come down on a crane,
that's right. We were
where you're not hiding. That was directly, he was planning to do that with Michael on the tour. Yeah. So to me, and that crane comes back a few times in the film. It actually introduces Frankenfurter in Time Warp after Time Warp or before.
Castle,
Yeah. So to me, there's, again, Trevor Moores, I have to give kudos to him and his grip team, trying to bring, and make sure whoever they're flying around is safe. It was a big
weren't there a couple of grips in wardrobe actually operating
they actually were.
I think Trevor's brother was one of them, actually.
That is exactly right. They put them all in heavy highliner, and that was a highlight of my my production experience with that, is seeing all my grip team have to put on costumes that were very hearkening to Rocky Horror, which was a lot of fun. Also, what else can we talk about? Like anything else that you wanted to discuss, Peter?
Well, I guess one thing, sometimes I think, like there was a lot of, pressure put on us, by the demands of the show and all that. But I think, in discussing this, I mean, like Kenny was a choreographer and he was very involved with this, but it was Tony that was the actual, I think Tony Testa that was the actual
That is correct. That is
he had
right.
an assistant, and I thought, man, like sometimes, like I thought like we were getting a lot of heat and pressure and scrutiny, but it was nothing compared to what Tony was getting, because, like Kenny, having been a choreographer,
that is
was
correct.
Like all over that.
You're absolutely right. Tony, you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason why it's like Kenny, it must have been hard for Tony, because Kenny, whenever we go out in public to scout something, I discovered very quickly that he is a huge icon in the dance world.
Yeah.
So that's why I guess I always remember that. And I guess that must have been also had its challenges for Tony, because Tony was exceptionally talented as well. But, and you're right. It was a very demanding, creative thing.
Yeah.
There were high hopes for this, also for the dance world, and also for the fans of the original movie. There was a lot of pressure from everywhere.
Yeah. There was a question about what got me into production design.
There you go.
And like my background is in visual art. I was at the Ontario College of Art before it became a university, and I, did a number of things there. Well, and I did do some things like video and animation and sound courses. I took like a kind of like a film appreciation thing, because I was always like really interested in film and theater and dance. And that's, like those were some of the, points I made to Kenny when we spoke about this, that had been, like something that, like had all been a constant. But anyway, I was at I just graduated from the Ontario College of Art, and I was taking part in a big sculpture exhibit in the early 80s in Toronto. And I remember when we were in the gallery setting up the exhibit, there was a couple of, like slightly older artists there, a couple of them that were actually, that had organized it, that had worked as scenic carpenters on David Cronenberg films. And the piece that I had in that sculpture show was a big kind of like a relief of like a, it was like it was described as a Ziegfeld Follies version of a Greek folly, like a temple that had like a relief on it. And, like even when those guys said that, I thought, well, my piece kind of looks like a set, And so that started me thinking that maybe scenic carpentry was something that I could do. And I really wasn't much of a carpenter at that point. I'd, like done some stuff like banging some of these sculptures together, but my skill level was still, pretty low. But anyway, that got me thinking of that as something to do, like as an artist working. And because I exhibited sculpture and installation for about 15 years, and then did, like some carpentry and scenic painting off and on some, like independent low budget productions, like the first time we worked together on Jack and Jill and things like that, like then doing little stints, like in IA or at the CBC or whatever. And like I said, I was doing both carpentry and painting. And then I realized that, like some of my other skills and interests might be better serviced in the art department. So I transitioned into the art department, and then as I got more, like immersed in film and television, the like visual art world kind of was receding, and the focus became more on like film and television and that aspect of things. But I think that as Luc was saying earlier, like I think that that visual language and that visual vocabulary informs a lot about what we do and about that collaborative process. And that's one thing that like is interesting working with somebody like Luc, who I know has a very strong interest and connection to like the visual art world. And like it's like another language that you could talk. It's not just about the nuts and bolts and the physical things and the technical things, but it's about, like that creative, that, like inspirational, that, like more intuitive kind of part of the process that I think is a big part of that collaboration and that dialogue. But,
yeah, because anyone can learn process. You can learn process of how to make a film, how to do it. What I find is the hardest part. You can know about lenses, you can know about, like, all of that is in my toolbox. It's intent is always the hardest one. It's what do you intend to do? And that's why collaborating with a designer, especially a good one like Peter, is that you're open to those kind of discussions that are beyond process, because you can easily get caught in the weeds with that, but you always kind of end up applying it to how we practically do something. One of the questions in this vein that is on the text string here is, what kind of non-DP skills did you find useful in these types of more immersive productions? Which is kind of an interesting question, because it's kind of what we're talking about now. I mean,
diplomatic and negotiation skills,
right,
things like that,
aren't always solidly there. I can get passionate like anybody else. But yeah, no, I mean, that's an interesting thing about what we're talking about, is that whole, I still am amazed how, and this is what I love most about film and television and making things, is how a large group of people can coordinate to create one thing that is a massive undertaking. It's one thing if you're an artist sitting there and you're painting or drawing or sculpting, you're by yourself, or a photographer. but the idea of coordinating your crew and talking to you and being able to serve the director, which is ultimately what the goal is, but also understanding what your role is without going into different places, like the connection with actors and directors. I think I am very protective of that. Or Kenny with his dancers. It was important also, I could tell that Kenny was getting a cinematographer that was willing to kind of think a little bit not in a traditional sense. And that's what I love. I love the idea of newness. So that I think is a real, because I find the process and the technical side, as much as it's there and it is kind of the brush that you use, it can also be very daunting, especially for new cinematographers, because, oh my God, there's all this tech and how am I going to use it? Once you kind of know it and you become comfortable, you kind of forget it. It's in the background of how, and also the people that you choose to work with is a key thing. For me, it's like I cast my crew. It's not just, hey, you know what to do, let's do, or you're good. To me, it's also about personality. I mean, these are all things that you might not instantly think a cinematographer basically, cares about so much. But, I do my best work when I'm with a team of people that can say anything they want. There's no bad ideas. I say that to directors all the time. You're going to get my bad and good ideas. You're going to get them both. But at least we're going to try to discover. And also you'll have my full attention with the language you're trying to create. So to me, I think that might fall in that category of non-DP stuff. I mean, there's the politics, but also, in this show, working with the costume is, understanding why they're making choices, because I want their work to be represented as a collaborator in its best possible light. Even though, there's a vision that Kenny had that we're trying to do, we're all contributing to that.
Yeah.
Me, personality plays a huge part also. Leaving your ego at the door, but also being, making your opinions known. But you have to have that kind of
collaborative spirit, because like you said, I mean, that's you're, you're part of a team, whether it's within your department or, like department to interdepartmental, it is a big team.
I remember being a young cinematographer and feeling I had to know everything because everyone's looking at me. And to an extent, that's your job, is to understand the technical. But it's okay to say, you know what, I'm not sure about this. It's like the same as directors. I get along the best with directors that are confident enough in their own story to say, I'm not sure. But it's funny how, you end up collaborating with people. You find those same people at one. It's not always everywhere. But I do also
people tend to kind of gravitate and work well together. And
I think you just feel that. So to me, that's more of an instinct than, a technical kind of knowledge and all that, because I'm also a nerd. I love all that stuff, but I do love that intersection of the technical and the creative and that whole kind of magic behind the curtain, without sounding like a cheesy cliche, but it's true.
There's a question here about if you have to have an artistic or construction background to bring to the table. And, it's, I think that it's important to have a creative background. I think it's important to be able to express your ideas visually, because it's about communicating. So, as Luc was saying, I do some stuff in SketchUp. I had, dabbled in AutoCAD, but I'm not, I'm not a set designer. There's other people that could do that. I could give them something preliminary to start with, but to my mind, being able to communicate something using the tools is important, because that also, I think, informs your approach to it. I think, Luc, you would probably say the same thing. You don't have to have been a gaffer or an operator to be a DP, but, to know how to light a set, to know how to operate a camera, I think, informs decisions you make. So
very much,
you have to have, a creative, a facility and a strong visual language. Because I know that there's some people that are production designers that come from film school, and maybe they always just kind of gravitated to that and they like that aspect of the process the best, and then they end up as like production designers, or some people are make their way there from being set decorators, and like they've been involved with that, and then they make that's an often common transition from decorator to designer. And I think those are all really good experiences to have. But like going back to what Luc was saying earlier, we are making something, which means sometimes creating something that didn't exist before. And that's a lot different than, like approaching your job by, like going out and looking for something and shopping for something. So I think that's, like that comfort and facility with creating, with making, with, like taking an idea and making it a reality is an important part of it. So, I think that, it's good to know something about construction. I think you definitely should know a lot about art, but, there are different routes to being a production designer. But I think that, the strong visual vocabulary and, a broad range of references and certain, technical kind of artistic abilities to be able to communicate ideas, I think is really important. I don't know if there's
the more
in
the more knowledge, I would add, the more knowledge you have on the technical, or let's say construction, all that, the more time you can spend being creative, as opposed to figuring out or coming up with an idea that is unbuildable. I would imagine that your construction coordinator will say, this is not, then suddenly you're wasting more time. So if you can communicate, I think communication, I agree, is the key for everybody.
You were saying about, sometimes, it's okay to say, I don't know that. I mean, I'm sure you know a lot about lighting, but sometimes it's good to get, you say, this is what I'm looking for. I want something like this. And you might have an idea and offer that up, but then the gaffer might say, yeah, but if we do this, it'll be a lot quicker. You'll be able to, you have a little bit more freedom. You could,
that's it.
There's sometimes, I think it's important to have an idea, but also be open to other people's inputs. And that's part of that whole collaborative thing that you were talking about earlier.
Absolutely. I mean, directors do that with us. Why shouldn't we continue and take advantage of the talented people you have around you? And sometimes, though, I will talk to a gaffer in a technical way so that we can get to the core of the quality of light I'm looking at. But then I'm always open, now that I know the idea has been communicated, that they can come up with either a better way. Also, hey, what about this? There's also the line of creative too. They might have a creative idea that's also good. Ultimately, that's no different than a director directing an actor. Actors are bringing choices to the table, but a director will kind of guide them a little bit. I see that as my job as well. There's some things I have very specific ideas, some others I don't, and using this knowledge base only helps. It's not necessary. I don't need to necessarily know about fixtures. That's what a gaffer could do, but it helps. It definitely does. Because then you get to the core of it and you can play more. You're not figuring out what fixtures might be, and sometimes it's budgetary. You don't have as big of a package, and sometimes a gaffer will be more in tune with that, or you have a budget for construction, I imagine. And it's like me saying I'm in awe of how designers and art directors, I'm sure your construction coordinator understands, we have so much money and I have to spend it on labor, and I have to, it's just a fascinating thing how many pieces need to come together with it. But I think it's a good question, because some people that are probably newer at and want to be designers or DPs, it's that entry point is always hard. You think you have to know everything. And I think it's symptomatic of a lot of younger people. I find as I get older, I'm okay to say, I don't know that, but I'm going to find out. And, be responsible, because I think also people understand when you don't know. There's no way, it's always just better to be upfront. But when I'm not working, I'm basically training myself. I'm reading up on new technology, on art, I go to the AGO. This whole thing of staying involved, of understanding my role is to blend the creative and the technical. You continue to go to film school, research, You know,
Yeah, I know.
that's what.
Everything is always research. I mean, you got to constantly always be, like on and open to influences, ideas, any kinds of input, like something that, you weren't familiar with. It's that openness, I think, is a really big part of it, and just being able to, like accept that,
Exactly. And there's always, I can't even count how many times that I've been on a location with you in prep or a studio, and you've got your sketch pad and you're drawing things, and I'm looking over your shoulder, or directors are. Without that skill, we would have been, I'll get you some images later.
Yeah.
As opposed to
Yeah, just like, I mean, like
it's
something very crude, but something on the spot saying, well, what if, like we did something like this, or on that thing there, we, like add that, or something just something to be able to kind of get an idea out, Yeah.
Exactly. There's one little question here. I know we got to wrap up soon, but I don't know if we have time to answer this. What are some of the unique advantages, highlights, or disadvantages of working on a musical production? This might be a good way to, I don't know, wrap this up.
Yeah. Well, there were a lot of, like it was a really fun project. It really was. I mean, it might have been like a bit of a fool's errand because, I mean, like tampering with a classic, but, I think that they wanted to do, it was, like to my mind, it was a more American and, like more diverse kind of production. And, like you were saying about, what that talk that Lou gave us, I think that really kind of summed it up nicely. It's like, I've seen over the years a number of different Rocky Horror Show stage production, so this was just a different film production, so there was definitely like the fact that I think that it offers you an opportunity to do something that's maybe a little bit more fun, a little bit more creative, because there is, I think in most cases, with things like musicals, a bit of I don't know, like a fantasy element, like something that is like I don't know if it maybe like an element that kind of takes you out of your normal like day-to-day world, which as we were saying earlier, kind of opens you up to maybe a different idea, a different approach. I don't know. Is there, from your perspective, what would you?
No, I mean, I think it's a good question to kind of wrap it up just based on general impressions. I mean, the fun aspect was definitely top of the list. The idea of playing in a genre that so many people hold dear and being allowed to be the one that's going to do your part in bringing this whole thing. Disadvantage, there's never enough time. You hear this constantly in film production. There's never enough time. Also, I think it wasn't a musical I felt that was structured to allow in the shooting process very much, like we didn't have more time for this. It felt, for this scale of production, it didn't feel like, it felt like a fairly kind of usual schedule. I forget the exact amount of days, but it never felt like we had enough time.
I would be surprised if it, like maybe around 30 would be my guess.
Yeah, I think it was around 30 days, which is not a lot for a scale of this production.
Material, no.
And I'd say, the advantage for me was that I learned so much. I just learned and I stayed open, and it taught me again to stay open to new things, to new ideas. Sometimes as you kind of work within a certain genre like drama or sci-fi or action, like wherever you are, it's good to kind of challenge and get out of that. And I just feel very fortunate to have been given an opportunity to kind of think out of that box, because you don't always get a chance. Sometimes you're stuck in a track, in any creative person. But to be handed this, everyone I told that I was working on this in the business and beyond was like, wow, you're going to get crucified. That was the first thing they said. And secondly, I'm like, well, we're going to try to make it our own. So, but just to me, just having, as you say, Lou there to give us license, to me, made it a legitimate attempt of, this is okay, guys. You may hate it, you may love it, but it's meant to be a new thing. So, but to me, I'll always take that to the next thing, this idea of always trying to discover. Also know there are certain genre musical things that people want to see. They want to see great numbers and great design and great lighting design. But even within that, to me, it was a lot of fun to coordinate. And I'll always be happy I did it.
Yeah. Yeah,
and
definitely.
working with you again. I mean,
Yeah.
just again,
Yeah.
I can't stress that collaboration, how important. I mean, you can feel very alone.
We got to do it again soon.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And it's always appreciative how good you are to kind of
Well, thank
think
you.
out
You're
of the
always fun
box
to
and just kind of
collaborate with.
play. So yeah, no, I
There's
appreciate
always
that.
some
So
good dinners or something along the way.
exactly. So I guess this is the end of our talk. I just wanted to thank everybody for tuning in and allowing us to take a couple of hours of your time. It's
Yeah,
been,
it was lots of fun.
I can't believe how fast it went, but it's also a production that, you know, we did 4 years ago now, and it's been great to kind of go back and think of all the experiences we had. Obviously, I think there's going to be some social media. If anyone has any questions, I think all our tags are all going to be included with the video. If you have any specific questions you want to ask Peter and I, you can do so. I think we're going to probably check out the Facebook page and all that. So if there are questions there, we're happy to answer them. I don't know if you want to say any parting words, Peter?
Well, I'd just like to say that I feel honored to be invited into this forum, and doubly so because I was the first production designer on this. I think that it's an important collaborative process that needs to be, kept in mind and strengthened between DPs and production designers. I think that, like Luc has always been a great collaborator, and, I look forward to working with him again, but it's, we're basically both involved with the same thing from different angles. We want to visually present the story, Luc is filming it and we're putting the stuff that's in front of the camera. So, we got to work together, and this was a great way to kind of heighten that creative process.
No, it's a great collaboration.
Yeah.
Almost as important as director and DP and cinema and designer, because I can't imagine how many times we've chatted on our own about things. So thanks again for joining us.
Well, it was lots of fun. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you.